Hi, everyone. Thank you. Good afternoon. I am a lecturer here at QUT, and I'm officially in School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences, but I have a supervisor in math as well. Oops, don't need to see the chat. Yes, but first I would like to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land of where I am here at QUT, the Turrbal and Yagara, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and also extend that a little bit to let you know a little bit about the place where I'm from. So I am from Virginia, and which is the middle of the East Coast. And I actually just realized I went to high school with Anako, the previous speaker, which I didn't know she was in Australia. Anyway, we were the same year, same high school. We're from the same place. So anyway, just fun fact, what are the odds? So lands where I grew up was known as Tesnokomica. It is the lands of the Powhatan tribe. And so in Algonquin, it means densely inhabited land, which gives you an idea that there were lots of people there before the British arrived. And so this is the land of the Powhatan tribe, and the Powhatan, there was also actually a confederacy in this region where there were like 30-something tribes together. And of course, Jamestown was settled in 1607. The British arrived, and with that, conflicts shortly after that started. And of course, the size of Tesnokomica ultimately was reduced. And you might be familiar with Pocahontas, the story of Pocahontas. So she was born in 1596, and so she is from this region. And so she was the daughter of the chief Chief Powhatan. And so, of course, I will admit that I was a huge fan of the Disney movie growing up, that sort of thing. But I really wonder, like, if she had the chance to tell her story herself, because that's obviously from a different perspective. Like, what would that say? Is the movie accurate? Probably not. So just leave you with that. And then a little bit more about me. So this is where Virginia is, the middle of the East Coast. And I realize it's very similar to where Brisbane is in the middle of the East Coast of Australia. And so I grew up in Virginia. I went to Cornell University, which is in New York, not New York City. It's very much 4 hours away from New York City, in upstate New York, as they call it. And I studied earth science of earth systems. And after I finished, I worked for a professor at the university, Professor Drew Harbell, which was very much my first mentor. And I worked for her as a research assistant. I was helping her manage this research coordination network about the ecology of marine infectious diseases, which was this kind of NSF, which is similar to the Australian Research Council, big funding, big grant that was about making this network about this certain topic. So that was really great. It gave me exposure to all these researchers in the field. I helped organize the inaugural sort of, get together of all the, members of this network. So that was really great. And so after that was maybe 1 or 2 years after my bachelor's. So I was thinking grad school, and as an East Coaster from the US, I was really, I thought extending myself was going to be going to the West Coast, like California or like Washington State or something like that. So that was kind of where I had my idea of where I was going to go to graduate school. And of course, as you can see on the map, that did not happen. I went to the University of Queensland for my PhD in School of Biological Sciences. And that was because one of the postdocs coming into my lab was American, but had also just finished her PhD at James Cook University in Australia. And so she was telling me about what it's like in Australia and how it works, et cetera. And because this fully funded project had come, was being advertised. That was a part of this big coral reef monitoring project that was at a global scale. And so she kind of, she said, oh, well, you might not get it because in general, you need honors or a master's, that sort of thing for PhD in Australia. But like, I'll help you with your application. I just had to write a 1-pager of like what I would do with the data, that sort of thing. So she helped me, submitted it, promptly forgot about it and was worrying about my US applications. And of course, I was successful in getting that. And just the timing of everything, like they wanted me to start February. And of course, you don't hear back from US applications until like April. You submit them end of the year, then you hear, a few months later. So it was kind of like this opportunity just sort of landed in my lap on some levels. And so I was a part of this project, which was really great. And it was applying machine learning to image analysis of coral reef photos. And so I can talk a little bit more about that later. But then so I analyzed all the photos from Timor-Leste, which is one of Australia's closest neighbors. It was newly independent from Indonesia in 2002. And so that was, also unexpected. I will admit I had not heard of this country until we were going there to survey it for this project. And so, but then once I was there, it was early in my PhD, and I had done an internship at the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration during my undergrad. And they had coincidentally just done a bunch of US international aid funded work in Timor. So I knew there was this giant data set. Like we had just collected data there as a part of this coral reef survey project. And then I went back and did my own surveys, and that kind of is how my PhD sort of formulated. Right. But then kind of backing up a little bit in like the data science element of my story, I suppose, is so actually Aniko and I actually went to this very a math and tech science school in Northern Virginia that is, you have to, it's a competitive process to get in, that sort of thing. So I was exposed to like the best of, science, tech, coding, that sort of thing. I was required to take a Java-based coding class during high school. And so I took it in year 9. And honestly, I was not very prepared. Like I didn't really have an understanding of what computer science was, that sort of thing. I was like, why do I care about making robots go through mazes and, things like that, those little exercises that we had to do. And so I did fine in the class ultimately, but I kind of almost got turned off by it, or it wasn't this exciting experience of like, now I love coding. It was very much not that. And even with advanced math and things like that, I was always good at math. However, no one told me that I could like use math to help save coral reefs, right? It was all the examples or like, banking or finance, and you're like great, that's really cool, but like that doesn't intersect with what I'm interested in. So then, fast forward to my PhD. So I kind of avoided it for too long. And then, in your PhD, you start having to like do stats and things like that. And R, I knew I wanted to use R because that's kind of what in biology, it's very, very common, and versus like a point and click sort of thing. And then with this project, we used this big camera to take images of a reef at a kilometer scale. So when I did my surveys in situ, like diving in the water, like I did a 15x2 meter transect, which is 30 square meters. And so this camera would go like 1.5 kilometers, and we collect like 900 images. And so this was like the analysis it's nothing fancy, just randomized points on an image, of the reef. And then, back in the day, a person had to go through and classify every single one of these points. So like 0.1 would be sand, and 0.2 would be also sand, and, things like that. But of course, this is a perfect setup for machine learning, right? And so now, instead of analyzing the whole 20,000 photos that I looked at for a chapter of my thesis, I looked at maybe 1,000, and the machine ran the rest of them. And so then so it was definitely a learning process of learning R, using it for analysis. But then after I finished my PhD, I actually started working at the University of Queensland Library as a technology trainer, where my main role was to teach these sort of 2-hour short course R classes that were kind of a series of 6, starting really basic R versus RStudio, R as a calculator, functions, things like that. And then all the way to eventually, we do really, plotting, data manipulation, and a little bit of PER and mapping. But that was the first time I had actually discovered map. And I was like, oh, like this is cool. So I knew I had the basics of R, but through teaching R, I actually learned a ton more than I thought I knew R, but then you can always learn more. And so that's kind of I think I'll start wrapping it up. And so now I'm teaching the geospatial information science class here at QUT. This is the first time, my first semester teaching. So that's a journey in and of itself. But then of course, ArcGIS is the main program they use. And I'm trying to push QGIS as well. There's proprietary, then there's open source softwares, but I'm also like, you can use R to analyze spatial data. And like, there are just many different tools, many different ways to do the same thing. And I'm also an organizer of Our Ladies Brisbane here in Brisbane. And however, at the moment, it's kind of taking a backseat because of teaching and things like that. But that's, I went from being scared off of programming, the first time I ever had to really interact with it, to, now being a huge proponent of R, and everyone should use R, and it's the best thing ever. So yeah, that's me.